Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast. My name is Phil Schiavone, working for the Coalition for Christian Outreach, the CCO, where we're transforming college students to transform the world. And with me today from Hearts and Minds Bookstore in Dallastown, Pennsylvania, the host with the most to say about the books that you should be reading, Byron Borger. Byron, how are you doing today?
Well, Phil, I'm pretty good. I can't ever think that I'm as good as you are with that great introduction. But yeah, if you ever want to come here and introduce us, when we do things, you got this great voice. So I'm excited. Yeah, we're doing okay. It's a little dreary here today. It was icy this morning as we're recording this. I don't know what the weather will be like when people are listening, but whoever you are or wherever you are, we're glad you're listening.
And hopefully it brings you a little warmth listening to our voices, because the icy, foggy, rainy winter, I am done with it. Punxsutawney Phil was not done with it, but Phil Schiavone is done with it. And Byron, I'm there in a heartbeat, man. If you need my voice, my face, whatever, I'm there to have your back in that. And yeah, I would be glad to do anything along those lines. And on a quick production note, we took a little gap here because of the Jubilee Conference. So we're sorry we're off our little bit of timeline here with our own production and with you, the listener, but we're back from the Jubilee Conference. And I think our theme today might be a little bit about it, but what else? What else do we need to talk about here?
Yeah, we've been doing this series, and if you haven't paid attention or if you haven't had time to do it, go back and listen to those. Plug in those podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Listen to this stuff, because the last several in a row, we have done books that have sold well or that have been important to the Jubilee Conference in Pittsburgh. And if you're just tuning in, these last couple of episodes have been about this great conference that Phil and I are involved with the CCO. It's a conference in Pittsburgh called Jubilee. This year was the 50th anniversary, so it was sort of special, the 50th Jubilee of Jubilees, where we invite college students to think about the Lordship of Christ, what it means to follow Jesus in every area of life, particularly their holy callings and their careers and vocations. So we have workshops on science and business and sports and law and medicine and, media. We do a lot of social concern stuff, racial reconciliation and earth keeping, not just for environmental science majors, but for anyone that cares about things like climate change. So we're doing all these sorts of culturally relevant, embodied, kingdom living speakers to tell the story of God's restorative plan for the creation. It's such a good world, and it is so messed up because of sin and idolatry, but Jesus is making it all new. And so that's the vision, the hopeful vision we give to students. We invite them together to think about their vocations and their callings and develop the Christian mind. So in the last couple of podcasts, Phil asked me, what are the books that have sold well at Jubilee, 50 years ago? What are the important titles or authors that shaped this vision early on? And so we've worked our way through a couple of decades of good book selling at Jubilee. I get to go out there and sell books. It's the biggest thing we do. There's some pictures at my Hearts and Minds Book Notes newsletter and some links to other articles I've written over the years and Facebook stuff. If you Google around, you'll find some pictures of that giant bookstore, because selling books is part of the ministry of helping students live into this big kingdom vision. So that's what we've been doing, and maybe we'll do it just a little more yet in this one. Is that okay, Phil?
Yeah, that sounds great to me. I had a blast being there at Jubilee with you. I got to contribute a little bit, and this was my 23rd Jubilee in some sort of a way, right?
23rd, 20 books.
Well, I'm sure it's
You're older.
I'll take that as a compliment. So yeah,
going when you were a kid.
I wish. But yeah, it is always a blast, and it's just the apex to our year as a campus ministry and as staff people, but of course as students as well. And I got to speak twice in breakout session forums. I spoke on sports and competition. And that's something that the Jubilee Conference and this whole worldview vision, this worldview of all things vision, redeemed in myself. I thought, my original thought as a Christian was, I got to eschew all my interest in sports and in competition and board games and recreation. I got to put all that aside to be the best evangelist that I can be. And what flipped in my brain was, no, those things actually help me explain the gospel when I live into those more fully for the Lord. So I got to speak onto that, and I also got to speak about stewardship and the parable of the talents and my own meditations on that I've been writing on over on Substack. So maybe at the risk of a shameless plug, I'll throw a link into the notes in there if you want to hear more about what I shared there about stewardship of all of the talents that God has given us to the glory of the Lord, not just our spiritual life, but everything that the Lord has invested into us is meant to be stewarded back for the glory of the Lord. And I think there's a fun Jesus twist I throw into that parable as well that I've been meditating on. So on top of that, the speakers were amazing. The reunions, I've got friends that are just Jubilee Conference friends at this point, like Justin McRoberts, who we talk about on this podcast. Like, he's a Jubilee friend of mine at this point, where we always catch up for a little bit.
Comes every year. He comes every year.
Every year. He knows me by name now. It's just amazing. And of course, it was Valentine's Day. Love was in the air this time. But Byron, we've got you, and we've got your bookstore, and it's a staple not only of the conference, but everything that we do in our ministry. And so why don't you just take us back now? Take us back to what Jubilee meant for you, if you want to share a little bit about your experience this conference, and lead us right into the books that we have today.
Well, we've talked about it in the other podcast. So if people have listened, sure. I don't want to bore them again. But Beth and I were in the original committee that helped plan the first Jubilee. We got this vision of the kingdom of God. Jesus preached in his very first inaugural sermon was Luke 4. Right. And the text they gave him was from Isaiah. And he said, in your hearing, it has now come to pass. And that text was an allusion to Leviticus 25, the year of Jubilee, where every 49th year into the 50th, the Sabbath of Sabbaths, the Sabbath year of Sabbath years, on the Day of Atonement, the day that they blow the shofar and the sins are forgiven because the blood has been shed. And on that day of getting right with God, the whole culture and society and economics and land use and relationship with animals, everything began to change because there were all these stipulations of ways in which debts could be forgiven and so on and so forth. So Jesus draws on Isaiah, which is drawing on Leviticus, which is just sort of beyond getting out of jail and getting your debts canceled, which was a part of it. But it's sort of this whole vision of the restoration of all things, this new rest that we live into to celebrate. I talked a couple of weeks ago about a book called The Kingdom of God as a Party by Tony Campolo. He was one of the great preachers at Jubilee in years gone by. And he wrote that book in part because he was at Jubilee and knew we wanted to explicate Leviticus 25, Isaiah 61, Isaiah 65, those kind of great passages that lead into Luke 4. And so I promoted that book as kind of an old-timey one this year from up front, and we sold a bunch of them. They didn't know who Campolo was. They didn't know how funny he is, and they didn't know how solid this study is. But the Kingdom of God as a Party is one that we highlighted from up front this year. So anyway, yeah, Jubilee has meant a lot to us over the years. We are struggling to get students to come to this event, with staff all over the country. Some have to fly in from Florida or from Fresno. And they cost a lot to, we used to just drive because everybody was in Western Pennsylvania. But now that this CCO is spread out a little bit, it's a little more tricky. And believe it or not, it works. We get kids there. They get their lives transformed. The redemption Jesus brings is made clear. And so we're excited about it. When we talk about the book table, though, Phil, I'll tell you what, you probably know that even in your years, over the years of the conference, one of the speakers that for a season was a regular. He doesn't come much anymore, but for a couple of years, he came every year in a row and captivated everyone. One of the big selling books in the history of the conference is by a guy named Bob Goff. Goff, some of you know, was a lawyer who was kind of goofy and funny and upbeat. He would have his offices in Southern California. You go to Tom Sawyer Island at Disney World if you wanted to meet with him. And if guys were so uptight and stuffy that they wouldn't do that, he's like, I don't want their being their clients anyway. And they would come and something playful and whimsical would break out as they talk about legal concerns at Tom Sawyer Island. Well, that's just a glimpse of who this Bob Goff is, that he's a lawyer who takes international justice issues seriously. He started schools in war zones. He's traveled to free kids that were enslaved in the child wars in the Congo. He's been to India, where he's helped stop the brick-making kilns that illegally employ little children. He's done some remarkable work. But Bob comes and tells these stories about how a whimsical, adventurous, kind of fun story of your life can really help shape your ambition and your goals as you become a follower of Jesus that just wants to bless others. So his first book, and it's still, I think, in a certain sense, his most popular, is a book called Love Does. Love Does. The subtitle is Discover a Secretly Incredible Life in an Ordinary World. That we can be whimsical and adventurous and full of faith, and as he puts it, leak Jesus on others. We can just show God's love. And if we're filled with God's love, it'll just spill out between the cracks of our lives. And love, he once said, I don't want to go to any more Bible studies, although he does. He has whole commentaries on the Bible. He says, I don't want to just go to Bible studies. I want to go to Bible doings, because love isn't real until it gets flesh and bones and lives out. Ideas grow legs, and we begin to share it with others. So Love Does is an important book in the history of the conference, and Bob's coming there several years in a row has just been fantastic. He's a good, fun guy, a friend of Jubilee, and the book Love Does is a famous one, a multi-million-dollar seller, copy seller from all over the world. And we knew him at Jubilee. So it's pretty exciting. This is one of the great books in the history of the conference. Do you remember Bob Goff coming?
I absolutely remember Bob Goff coming, and this was back in the days early on in my marriage. So Lindsay would come out with me, and we didn't have kids. And I remember we both bought the book. We read it together, and it was, I think, the thing I love the most about Bob Goff, and that I've sincerely tried to adopt, not only what you said, okay, so like the things that you said about the whimsy and leaking Jesus, but also his ability to make you laugh and drop a serious point and smush them together into even the way he speaks is the experience that he's preaching, right? Where it's whimsy, but it's serious. We're talking about these serious things, and yet somehow he can attach this lightness to it that makes it just so much more engaging. I often think about when Jesus is like, don't remove the speck out of your neighbor's eye until you remove the log out of your own. I imagine Jesus actually kind of being Bob Goff-ish, if I can use the analogy that way, of finding a log and holding it up to his eye and like running around being like, come on, don't do that, right? Like I can see that aspect of Jesus in Bob Goff, and I've tried to adopt the same in my own speaking and my own discipleship with folks over the years. I always tried to get them to laugh when we were talking about these very serious things, while also recognizing the seriousness of it. So Lindsay and I have both benefited from that. My ministry has benefited. Heck, my personality even has benefited from seeing how Bob Goff views the world.
Yeah. It was interesting because we didn't quite know who Bob Goff was. There was a guy who was popular back in the day. He has a marketing ministry now, and he's in the business world and making his mark in the business world. But his name was Donald Miller, and he was an atheist on a college campus who came to faith, kind of a bohemian. And he wrote a book like Blue Like Jazz years and years ago. And we had Donald years ago, a time or two. But in Donald's book, he keeps talking about this guy that mentored him, that threw his all and had his back and brought him out on adventures and took him with him places. And we thought, who is this guy, Bob, who happens to be discipling Donald Miller? And we wanted to know, but he never had his name. And I was selling books at a conference on the West Coast for the Christian Legal Society, a rather intellectual, I don't want to say stuffy, but uptight, serious legal theory, jurisprudence, and all this sort of stuff, heavy academic stuff about relating faith to law. And Beth and I were selling books at their annual conference. And this guy was going to speak about orphanages or something. And I thought, oh, this is nice. This is good. But, I wasn't expecting much. Well, within 5 minutes, I was hilarious in the back. And I thought, this is one of the best public speakers I've ever heard. And then I started to cry because he's telling these powerful stories of saving children and making a difference and taking risks for the kingdom. And I thought, holy smokes, whoever this guy is, we've got to get him to Jubilee. And pretty soon I realized, he's the Bob that we were trying to figure out who he was. I called Scott Calgaro, that was running the conference from California, late at night. I had forgotten about the time zone, and woke him up. And I said, I found our next Jubilee keynote speaker. His name's Bob Goff, and he's the Bob we've been looking for because he's mentioned obliquely in Donald Miller's book. Well, anyway, he came out the very next year. He came the next year. And then after having him 2 years in a row, we thought, okay, that's enough. Let's give it a break. Campola we didn't even have every year. And he said, I just want to come anyway. I'll just come and hang out. And so he and his wife came and hung around the book table just for fun for the third year in a row. And that was really cool getting to know him a bit. So Bob Goff, Love Does. The sequel to that book is called Everybody Always, Love Everybody Always. And I think it's in a certain sense even stronger. And then he did some about ambition and dreaming big. And then he has some devotionals. His brand new one, for any Goff fans that are out there, is actually based on a video curriculum. There's QR codes in the book. And it's him going to the Holy Land, taking people around the Sea of Galilee and where Jesus did his things, and following Jesus by way of these live teachings set actually in the Holy Land. So that's Bob Goff's brand new one that most people don't even know about. But
What's
Love
that one
Does is a
called?
classic in the history of Jubilee. Following Jesus or something like that. I forget. I got
Okay.
it over there.
I'll get it right in the
Yeah, it's
notes.
brand new. Good. So that's the first one I want to talk about. We haven't sold quite as many in recent years because, again, college students are in college for a couple of years and then they move on. So they don't always remember the old time speakers. Goff is still a popular writer and a great biblical thinker, but he wasn't as well known in our circles again. So I highlighted it at Jubilee this year in honor of 50th. I just said to everybody, hey, this conference has been going on for 50 years, and this is one of the top 2 or 3 best-selling books in the history of the conference. And if you want to blast, you can enjoy this book no matter who you are. I'll give you your money back if you don't like it. So, yeah, Bob Goff is a friend and a good guy and a sort of quintessential Jubilee speaker. Some of the Jubilee workshops, not your own, Phil, but some of them are a little too brainy and even a little dry sometimes, presenting great quality philosophical thinking about a particular area of life, a nut to crack philosophically in art or science or nursing or law or sports or capitalism or whatever. And so some of them get a little brainy. And so to bring in a fun speaker that can make you laugh is always a good part of Jubilee too, because there's a lot of heaviness, a lot of transforming thinking going on. And so to bring a guy that can just say, get out there and love people and be whimsical, it's always a winner. So kudos to Bob Goff. And if you don't have Love Does yet, man, you should order it because it's a great read. Well, the second book we're going to talk about here in the 3 books from Hearts and Minds is a woman that has been to Jubilee 2 years ago, and in my mind hit an absolute home run in her first talk 2 years ago. She did the creation talk. Those of you just tuning in now may not know, but Jubilee has 4 main keynote stages, talks from the main stage, and they're on the doctrine of creation, the doctrine of sin and the fall, the doctrine of redemption in Jesus, and then the doctrine of end times, or the future restoration and hope that we can live into because Christ is making all things new. So that creation, fall, redemption, consummation, restoration story is the kind of framing thing for the conference in the last 20 years or so. And that story begins with the doctrine of creation. And Carmen gave that talk 2 years ago on a brand new book that wasn't even out yet at the time. She came back this year and did the restoration talk, the 4th Sunday morning talk about the hope that the year of Jubilee implies, that the Sabbath practices live into, and that kind of as we imagine the future world that God is building, how we can begin to anticipate that now in the practices of Jubilee economics and so forth. It was one of the best talks in the history of Jubilee. So when people post that, I'm sure the Jubilee team will week after week post some of those keynote talks, assuming there were no technical glitches. I am sure over the next weeks, those talks will be made public, and you should keep an eye out for that. They were all really good this year. All 4 of them had something special in their own way that we could talk about. But the 4th one by Carmen was so good and powerful and appropriate for the Jubilee vision. So I would commend that to you. Carmen has written a couple of different books, and she's working on a big academic commentary on Exodus. She's written notes and some Bible commentaries, like those study Bibles. There's a women's study Bible out there that she wrote a lot of the notes to. But the books I want to tell you about, there's 3 of them, and I'm just going to focus on one. It is called Being God's Image. Why creation still matters. You see, as she explains in this book, and as we say at Jubilee, the doctrine of creation is not just that God made the world, in 6 days, whatever. We can argue about the literal or poetic meaning of Genesis 1 and 2, but it's not just that God made the world. It's that God sustains and orders and invites us to steward and open up the goodness of the creation. So in a certain sense, the doctrine of creation, what John Calvin called the theater of God, is the place where the whole drama happens. So the fall into sin is the wreck and ruin of the good creation, the vandalization of the shalom that we know that Adam and Eve so experienced in the wonderful Garden of Eden. So the doctrine of creation is the foundation to properly understand the radical implications of sin and idolatry. It's also the very place where the cross is rooted, right? It is rooted in the earth. That cross was on the ground and Jesus rose in his body. So the doctrine of creation helps us understand fall. It helps us understand redemption. And of course, if we're right about this, as I think we are, Revelation 21 and 22, the end of the story talks about recreation. The city of God now is the new creation. So we go from creation to new creation. That's the plot of the story. So without the doctrine of creation, we can't understand the Christian faith. You can't understand the radical nature of the fall. You can't understand the redemption of Jesus, and you can't understand the kingdom of God and the future hope. So the whole thing rests on this doctrine of creation, which is why this book, I want to suggest, is so very, very important for each and every one of us. Her talk at Jubilee 2 years ago was about this. The book has now come out, Being God's Image, Why Creation Still Matters. There's a foreword by J. Richard Middleton, the Jamaican brother who is a great Old Testament scholar and has done a keynote at Jubilee as well on these very themes, eschatology being this good news that God is redeeming all areas of life, and in Christ all things are made new. All things are made new. Her being made in God's image sets the stage for what it means that humans are made in God's image, that we bear God's image, that we have dignity and worth and purpose and a direction as we unfold the creation to God's glory. So this pervades the conference every single year, this theme, and I think this is the book that says it as well as anything in print. Accessible, easy to read, QR codes to the Bible Project videos. There's questions to study and ponder. A great foreword by Richard Middleton. This is a great, great book. She has an earlier one on why the law still matters, and she has a newer one on why the church still matters. So her trilogy of books that all have these uniform covers are very, very nice. But the centerpiece, why God's creation still matters, being God's image, is the one I want to highlight as a quintessential Jubilee book and a great resource for any of us that if we weren't at the conference but want to get a flavor of why all this stuff matters, this book will change your life.
Yeah, amen. I remember when I read that book, I just could not stop talking about it to anybody and everybody that would listen to me. And I mean, you covered it so well there, so I don't want to add too much to it, other than the fact that my job in the CCO and the campus ministry that I work for is I supervise and oversee a region and help develop the region. If I was heading back on the campus myself, this is the book I would carry around with me all the time and be trying to start book studies with, because so often the gospel just starts with, we are sinners, and then Jesus comes and saves us, which is, of course, all true. But I have always spent so much time with students trying to say, hey, where does the gospel actually begin? And no one nails it better than Carmen Imes in that book, or on the stage, but in that book in particular, just gets at the nuance, the definition, and how we should be thinking about this. But then she walks through the whole of the Bible narrative, just like you were saying, and carries that theme throughout the whole, just like Bible Project does as well. So it made sense she partnered with them on the publishing of that book. I mean, it's where I would start, not only with college students, but with anybody else that has a truncated form of the gospel.
Yeah, and she studied, by the way, under the same Bible scholar in her earlier years as the guys that make the Bible Project, Tim Mackey
nice.
and those guys.
Yeah.
So you can see the similarities, and she claims they got it all from this guy at Multnomah Bible College. But, she quotes N.T. Wright and other big important scholars that are important in our tradition. Let me just, in case anybody's interested, the first part of this is called Humans in God's World. And she has a chapter called The Pattern of Creation, The Crown of Creation, Getting to Work. That's often a theme at Jubilee, that our work matters to God. We even have a day before Jubilee, on that first Friday, called Jubilee Professional, for adults in the work world, or churches that have a marketplace ministry to encourage artists and business people and corporate folks to weave together their belief and their behavior in the workaday world. And so Getting to Work, she nails that. And then the Human Project. What does it mean to be human? What are we doing when we actually bear God's name and bear God's image? The second part is the human quest and human suffering, because the sin and fall is part of the real story. And then the third part is being human in God's new world. When the kingdom is coming, Jesus is the new human, and we model ourselves as we become one with him. A new humanity. We don't do it alone, but men and women together in God's community. And then she has a chapter called The Beloved Community, using that great phrase from Martin Luther King, the beloved community. And so her last chapter is from creation to new creation. So yeah, she's telling the whole story, showing why it matters for our dignity, for our worth, for our humanness, for our sexuality, for our work, and for our purpose as we become Christ-like people living as new humans in a new world that Jesus is actually making in our midst. So yeah, love this. Love Carmen. Watch her on YouTube. She has lots of great videos. Buy the book from us if you can. We'd sure appreciate it. Well, we got one more to tell you about, and this is one that we didn't even announce at Jubilee. I was going to announce it for the Sunday morning talk, but we ran out of it because word got out about it. We only had one case, and we sold them all. And it was the brand spanking new. It just came out that very week. A book by N.T. Wright called God's Homecoming. I'm happy that I didn't recommend it because Carmen's book is just as good for students. But for those that want to dig deeper, that want to get the full vision of God's restorative plan to make all things new and to be with us once again. Emmanuel is the word we use at Christmas time. And of course, it's used in Revelation 21 and 22 again. God comes to earth. We don't get raptured away and go to heaven. Heaven comes to earth if we read the Bible carefully. Revelation 21 and 22, Emmanuel happens again. So it's God's homecoming. I love this title, God's Homecoming, the forgotten promise of future renewal. Well, it isn't forgotten at Jubilee, but many forget it, and many need to hear this. And in a certain sense, this is a sequel to the important book, Surprised by Hope, that he wrote about eschatology and our new hope of the kingdom coming and how that changes the mission of the church altogether. So that Surprised by Hope, which was a pivotal book for him, it's a paperback, might be one to start with. But I like this one even more. So far, I'm not through it yet. God's Homecoming, N.T. Wright. Word got out at Jubilee Professional Friday, and the adults in the room all came down and got it, and we ran out of it. We thought, I'm not even going to be able to announce this. I had a slide ready and was going to announce it Saturday night and say, if you want to understand the Friday morning of Jubilee, this could be one of the best books to work through this next year to get at this broad vision of eschatology that gives us hope and mission and why God cares about coming home to us again. So yeah, I was going to announce it, but we ran out of them, so I couldn't even announce it at Jubilee. So this is my favorite book I didn't announce at Jubilee this year. It just came out a week or two ago, and we are thrilled to tell people about it. We've got it at 20% off here at Hearts and Minds Books. And man, it's so, so good. I could tell you more and more about it, but I'll just shout out that it really does underscore this story that Jubilee is created to try to tell. One other funny little thing, he says in the beginning of the book that, I've talked about this my whole life. Like, this is not new to me. But he said, I myself have underappreciated the deep, deep connection between creation and recreation, between God with us in the garden, walking intimately in the garden, and then coming in the person of Jesus to share life with us with skin on, and then the hope that he will come back again and make all things human and new and good in the shalom of the New Jerusalem. His exploration of the temple, his exploration of themes of glory and what that means is so, so rich. And he says, I'm not saying anything brand new, but I am underscoring something that I had no idea how very, very important it is. He says, this is the gospel.
Love it. I love it. Friend and co-host Sam Levy, helped bring that case up with us. I drove with him out to Jubilee, and I'm not going to lie, I was so excited that I was like, I'm just going to nab one now, and then I'll pay for it when I get there. And I was like, no, I'll be able to get my copy later. That's how excited I was for the book that I almost just nabbed one right then and there in the car ride up to Jubilee. But
it was fun because, we had already gone. We had packed our truck and left on Wednesday, and the books didn't arrive till Friday. And the publisher said we could sell them. They technically weren't streeting until Tuesday, but they said, you go ahead and sell one case. And so you guys came here and got them and brought them at the last minute for us. It was quite a story. And I got to say that on Friday to the Jubilee professional folks. And yeah, we sold out of them. So it was a neat moment, a fun, special kind of way to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Jubilee. Did you end up getting one? Did you end up getting one then?
No, not yet. Because I'm in the middle of books, and I wanted to make sure that everybody else that was coming could get a book. So I didn't want to take one from somebody else, but it was fun bringing them still warm, still off the press.
The ink was
still settling. But yeah, N.T. Wright is amazing. I did hear him on an interview of another podcast talking about how Jesus was the ultimate heaven and earth person, and we are to be heaven and earth. And we too often distinguish, right? Earth from heaven. Heaven's then and there, but earth is here now. But no, it's this combination. We're to be heaven and earth people, and that's with the hope of everything he's talking about in this book, God's Homecoming. And he also mentioned that if you've read Surprised by Hope, this is like the obvious next read that you just must read from him. And Surprised by Hope was life-changing for me and for my friendship circle too. We all read Surprised by Hope a bunch of years ago. So yeah, excellent choice there. And I'm bummed that we sold out of them so quickly, but it's always fun to sell out. And I'm glad to feature it here on the show too. So any closing notes from you, Byron, before we close out?
Well, Jubilee helps students live into this vision, and it's the task of every church to do that. So if you are a CCO worker listening to this, if you're not familiar with the CCO, I just hope you think about these kind of things in your own faith community, in your own friend groups, in your own small group Bible studies. This kind of implications of the future, this implications of the kingdom coming, the implications for work and politics and civic life and all different sides of life, this holistic view of the gospel. You use the word truncated, and even people that wouldn't want a truncated gospel still sometimes are practical, if not atheists, practical dualists. They think their faith is somehow separated. There's a gap between Sunday and Monday. And so we live in a culture that's now changing a lot. The understanding of the faith and the relationship of the faith to the world around is contested everywhere. And so we need this wise, solid biblical perspective that the CCO offers and that you and I talk about on this podcast, need it more than ever. So we thank you for listening. We thank you for buying books. We hope this inspires you to spread the word and to talk about this stuff in your own circles. Pay attention to these podcasts. I really, really think these books can make a difference. It's not all we need, but it's certainly one of the things we need is good books to keep us on the right track, thinking about this stuff well. So we hope it's fun. We hope it's useful. And we hope you buy some books.
Well, here, Byron. And I did run into a few people at the conference that listened to the podcast. And so we're thankful for all of you that are listening in. And of course, the books here are all 20% off. The link that you can purchase these books will be the first link that you see in the show notes. So make sure to buy these books. But of course, read these books, as Byron was just saying, with your friends and with your church groups. We would love it to get these books into your hands, but also into your hearts, your minds, and into your very lives. So please do get these books, order them from Byron. Links at the top of the show. If you're listening, please like the show, leave us a good review, share the episodes with your friends and on your social medias. We would love that too, so we can get these shows and these books into more and more hands. And of course, check out Byron's books notes. There's a link in the show notes there to subscribe to that. Always a pleasure reading those newsletters and the great summaries that you give of these books. So thank you for keeping up with that, Byron. And thanks again to you, the listener, for listening to another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast.